The Quiet Apocalypse, a story from the collection entitled Rim by E.S. Wynne. Some cats won't play with laser pointers. Jones did, before we ran out of cat food, and he had to start hunting for survival instead of just for fun. Lasers were his fantasy, his analog for survival mode, a release for the hunting instincts that still hung in the automatic recesses of his mind, despite 9,000 years of domestication. Evolution might let us become soft, specialized, but it won't let us become weak. It won't let us become so specialized that we can't defend ourselves. Social drama, television, movies, roller coasters, video games. Without them, the thrill, the need to face the rigors of do-or-die survival would go unsatisfied. Jones chased lasers. I played shooters. Killzone, Call of Duty, Crisis. But even the most realistic and engrossing fantasy pales to pointless once your life has been thrown on the line. Struggle is a need, an urge, something comparable to sex, something you satisfy in any way you can until the day you find yourself confronted with the fierce intensity of raw reality. The reality we lived in before the end was a faux reality, one where numbers stenciled on paper meant something, and a decent cup of coffee cost as much as a week's worth of rice or a gallon of gas. It was a reality that thrived on specialization, where the amusement or comfort value of your pre-packaged skill sets and the singular trade you applied them to outweighed their true usefulness. Crowded cities seemed dangerous, as frightening as a pit of vipers, and isolation was as valuable as pure gold. The rent on the two-bedroom house I'd secured for myself in that reality wasn't cheap, but I liked the isolation, the silence that came with living in the middle of nowhere. As a patrol officer in a no-name town that straddled a highway, I dealt with people every day. Only some of them were responsible for punching holes in my faith in humanity, but dealing with the meth heads and registration dodgers for a living left me grateful for the big empty house, the welcome loneliness it provided. And the utilities were low, which was nice, offset by the solar panels on the roof. The last few years before the end had been rough, globally, and I think everyone was ready to drop their costs with alternative energy. It used to feel good to be green when your wallet had just a few more scraps of numbered paper in it. To this day, no one I talk to is really sure how it happened. The end came, and no one was there to see it. There were no bombs, no zombies, no invading armies, no pole shifts, prophecies, or plagues. The news was full of the usual UN-correlated strikes and police actions, but we weren't at war with anyone. In the years since, I've heard stories of tsunamis, earthquakes, city-block-wide sinkholes, industrial collapse, raiders with SUVs falling to gangs with bicycles and hybrids, the kind of isolated fallout that movies have taught our generation to expect when the end comes. No reasons why, though. Nothing but the usual shrug and scratch that seems to haunt everyone I've ever met in this quiet apocalypse. I remember the day it happened, though. I remember it with the clarity that a soldier remembers the face of that first kill, the sound the bullet makes when it punches into flesh. The day the end began started like any other day. I took a hot shower, spent a half-hour waking up with a cup of coffee and Call of Duty, fed the cat, pulled on my uniform, polished my shoes. My old, half-reliable Toyota grumbled to a start, and I drove the hour and a half to Nowhereville, accompanied by my loose, wandering thoughts and a tired playlist of ambient electronica. The highway was quiet, almost empty, damp with a drizzle of impassive rain. The world felt abandoned, even then, but seeing both patrol cars sitting silent in the station lot, and empty spaces where Phelps' Nissan and Odom's Ford were usually parked, left me suddenly aware, uncertain. I met the chief on the steps, chrome-dark windows carrying silver-edged storm clouds like mirrors all around us. "Go home, Ellis," was all he said. The shotgun he handed me was heavy, as familiar as the vest he dropped on top of it. "The Capitol's empty. There aren't any more checks coming," he added, locking the door, tossing me the key. "We don't work for free." "What happened?" I remember asking, but he just shook his head, stopped halfway between me and the sandy silver Dodge that I recognized as his wife's car. "It's the end of the world, Ellis." And then he was gone. I don't know how long I stood there after he pulled out of the station and turned right onto the highway. I remember the drizzle picking up conviction, spotting my uniform, the vest, the gun, with wider and wider drops. I remember the tired way I slogged across the lot, settled into my Toyota, stared into the wet, misty nothingness, wondered what to do next. Nowhereville had one mini-mart. Mike's. Like the station, the lot was empty, the open door and abandoned register a silent invitation to thieves. I packed a few cans, a sack of rice, and a bag of cat food into the back seat of my car, then left 320s in the crack of the change drawer in case Mike came back. It was more than the stuff I'd picked up was worth, but Mike had kids, a family. He'd probably need the money more than I would. I remember flipping on the radio, hunting between frequencies, catching nothing but static, silence. No news, no music, no hellfire and brimstone evangelicals, no harsh tones of the emergency broadcast system. The highway was a void of fog and asphalt, impossibly empty. Only a downed tree greeted me as I pulled into the driveway, wet leaves brushing my car as I slipped past. The full impact of the end didn't hit me immediately. Like a child, I fumbled for routine, polished my shoes, fed the cat, tried to find something besides yesterday's news on the slowly crumbling internet. Like snow in water, it fell apart at the edges, nothing updating. Nothing giving any indication of anything that had gone wrong, anything that was happening. Servers shut down one by one, toppling whole networks, until only a few scattered blogs linked on forgotten personal servers were left. Their news, a pastiche of disconnected, ghostly complaining, already months old. When the power grid went down less than a week later, all I felt was a flicker, a shiver that kicked the printer into a humming reset, and the blip of the router as the wireless finally dropped out, severing my last connection with an abandoned world. I registered the event unconsciously, remembered it the next day when I was in the shower. I hadn't really thought about power conservation before, but with my sole power input coming from the panels on the roof and the batteries in the attic, I found myself watching the charge levels with a new level of existential intensity, unplugging every appliance except the fridge and the computer, carefully considering ways of dealing with the eventual demise of the batteries that gave me heat, fire, water, and the ability to preserve food. Day by day, the world seemed to shrink around me. Distances seemed to stretch out, become infinite, while simultaneously closing in. My whole reality was a 6-acre universe where I could yell and never hear another voice yell back in return. I remember standing on my porch, looking out at the endless rolling hills of swaying pasture grass, that void of green-blue, wet and picturesque, wide and empty, my mind lost, abandoned. As an officer, as a commuter who put an hour and a half of tarmac between home and work twice a day, the world had seemed vast and simple, a patchwork quilt of stitched-together nowherevilles, and the empty, featureless pasture land between them. But after all that, after the faux world collapsed in around us, things changed. The world was wide, far wider than I'd ever imagined it could be, so wide that even the 6 acres of land I could see from my doorstep seemed like a world all to itself, a world full of unique and alien complexities that I was still frighteningly innocent of. At some point I decided that I had to start finding ways of growing my own food. The backyard was a wasteland of rotting vegetation, the remains of years of someone else's gardening gone to seed. Weeding and water perked up a few of the plants, tomatoes and okra, and a few of those I brought inside, kept in pots by the windows, fertilized with a paintbrush as soon as the first tiny flowers budded across their vines. I lived off of rice and canned food for a long time before the cabinets ran dry, but even then I'd been prepared. Like a baby, I weaned myself off of the foods of the world as it had been, and started trying to make meals by boiling anything I found in the yard that looked edible. At some point, the plants in the rotting garden started to bud and flower, and when the bees came, I stalked them back to their tree. A few days later, I smoked them out with an old teapot full of twigs and grass, carefully collected all the honey and wax I could carry back to the house. I wasn't crafty enough to come up with anything for Jones once the cat food ran out, but his own hunting skills came back with a ferocity that was impressive, and I never wasted a single bird or mouse that he brought me. I kept the shotgun handy, but never found occasion to use it. Hours I'd spend sitting by the kitchen window, nibbling on boiled grass or rice with bee-stingered wasps, waiting for something to come by that was large enough to hunt, something other than the jackrabbits and the sparrows that provided all the meat that ever ended up in my diet. It seemed to follow that somewhere in all that endless pasture would be a cow, tired and lonely, or even a herd of cattle led by some huge and majestic bull. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, I saw only the steady growth and dieback of the pasture grass, and never even so much as a hoof print. Twice I thought I heard the far-off grumble of a truck, the hornet whine of a dirt bike, maybe the singing whistle of a bicycle, or the stealthy crunch of gravel under quiet tires. But there was nothing. Civilization visited me only in haunting, a ghost that lingered in hallucinations and half-remembered dreams. 3 months after the faux world fell apart, it felt like I was the last human on Earth, the last living remnant of a civilization washed away by the impartial tides of time. Day by day, that feeling drew strength from the solitude, became more and more a seductive reality, and day by day a new future opened up before me, a vast vista that was as rich with possibility as it was with the cold, terrifying arrows of failure and pointlessness. It was a Tuesday when the Humvee pulled into the driveway, about 10 months after the world ended. 3 Marines met me on the overgrown and forgotten lawn, each of them seasoned and tired-looking, their uniforms fresh, boots polished under still wet mud. The leader tapped through a display I couldn't see on the screen of a small tablet computer, glanced up at me through half-fogged glasses. "Officer Ellis?" I remember nodding, feeling the weight of the vest the chief had given me, the shotgun hanging against my back, the confidence both objects gave me. I hadn't spoken to anyone but my cat since the day everything fell apart, and it took a moment to remember how to react. What to say, what sounds made words that still had some meaning to them. "Lieutenant Castillo," he saluted loosely. I smiled, saluted back. "We're part of a relief group," he explained. "We've been reaching out to survivors." "From the government?" I remember asking. "From the new government, yeah," he nodded. "We're rebuilding civilization, and we can use all the help we can get." I remember taking one last look at the house I'd lived in for the last 10 months, saw in the reflection of the windows the stringy and haggard figure I'd become. I thought about the plants I'd raised out of the rotting gardens in the backyard, the tomatoes and okra I'd coaxed to life with water, soil, and a paintbrush. I thought about the stack of dusty discs that had carried me through my old life, that faux life, the shooters, and the laser pointer that the cat had long ago refused to play with. I thought about sleek and sinuous Jones, and I thought about my future, about the life I would lead if I said yes. I took my time, pulled in a deep breath, met the dark eyes under Castillo's misty glasses with a gaze that was solid, certain. "Okay," I finally said. "I'm in. Let me get my cat."